Determine budget. Third process of project cost management knowledge area. A final process in a planning process group, because this process will give us cost baseline. Now let us look at inputs and tool and technique and how do we drive the cost baseline, which is a primary output of determine budget process. In order to determine the budget, we need to know few inputs which we also considered during estimating costs. They were scope baseline. We need to know about scope because even though we have used it in estimating cost, but we may need to refer it while we are creating a budget. So we need to use a scope baseline. It will give us an overall guidelines at a work package level which may impact the budget preparation. We also need to know the schedule. So project schedule, which we used in our previous process, is still required because while aggregating, we may need to take an idea that why these kind of activities are needed and what is the sequence of those activities. So project schedule is still relevant. We still need to know the risk register. So we need to understand what kind of risks are impacting our cost estimates. We need to know a resource calendar. Now resource calendar talks about who is allocated for what, how much duration to our project. So these were few inputs, at least these three, which we also used while estimating cost. Now the output of estimating cost, which was activity cost estimates, are essential input for determine budget. So we need to take activity cost estimates, which is an output of estimates cost. We also need to look at basis of estimates, which were again coming from previous process. Now in my view, this is the primary driver of determine budget process steps. Now on top of this, we also need an input which would be coming from our procurement knowledge area, which is an agreement. Now agreement could be a contract, could be an order, could be anything which we have given to our vendor for developing part of our software. And in order to govern everything, whenever we are doing anything in a project cost management knowledge area, we need a cost management plan. So these all inputs are needed for identifying a budget for our project. So how it happens? So let us look at our work breakdown structure, which we have studied during project scope management, which represents the complete work in a hierarchical format. So if we just visualize the work breakdown structure again, and at the leaf node at a work package level, we identify activities. Now these activities are the one which got estimated while we did activity cost estimate. So we have estimation of these activities coming from activity cost estimate. Now what we have to do is we need to identify budget at a project level, which is like a top root node of our work breakdown structure. So in order to do that, we need to apply tool and technique. The first tool and technique would be aggregation. Aggregation is talking about consolidating all this information and summing up and bringing it at a top level. So we need to apply aggregation. One tool and technique. How can we do it? We need a human mind, expert judgment. So expert would be doing this, and that's another tool and technique which is relevant for this process. Now, while doing this, we know that some level of reserve is already planned at activity level. but we may need a reserve at a work package level. And these work packages are further grouped or identified or linked with a control account. So we need to also see that what is the dollar value coming at a control account level, and do we need to put reserves here and maybe at here also a complete management reserve which go beyond a number which we get here. So in order to identify these all reserves, we need to apply a tool and technique, or we do identification of these reserves by doing reserve analysis. This becomes the third tool and technique of our determined budget process. Now, in order to reconcile the expenses with the funding, we also need to apply another tool and technique which is called funding limit reconciliation. Now, what is funding limit reconciliation? Now, you would be spending money regularly. Now, you won't be getting that, say, your expenditure may be following the S curve, but you won't be able to take money from the sponsor just like an S curve. You won't be going every day to the sponsor and saying that today we need this much money. So depending upon your organization structure or a factor, you need to identify at which particular milestones I need to take money from the organization. So you may need to identify some steps. Like initially you will say that I will take X number of dollars, and by this I would be able to run a project for first quarter. Then I need a Y number of dollars so that I can run the project for next quarter. So this identification is a tool and technique which helps us in identifying the money at Q1, X, Y and Z is called funding limit reconciliation, because this helps us in reconciling our cash inflow from the sponsor to our cash outflow, which is going in our day-to-day activities of project execution or payment to the vendors. So that's one of the tool and technique which is called funding limit reconciliation. Now the final tool and technique is historical relationship. Now this one is especially important when we are doing estimation using parametric or analogous. Now since the analogous and parametric estimations are done at a top level, we need to have a good historical data to tell us that what kind of variances. Historical data tells us the previous estimates and the real execution expenses, and that helps us in making the budget better. This relationship can also be used for bottom-up estimations. For example, we know that in general, historically, we have 10% variance between estimation and actual execution, and that variance depends upon the type of activity we do. So this historical relationship helps us in determining the budget at various levels. Now, what do we get out of it? We have been thinking about a set of activities, estimate which we got against those activities. We were applying some expert judgment, looking at the scope baseline again, looking at the project schedule again, looking at the risk register again, which may give us an indicator for our budget. And then we also did a funding limit reconciliation. Now we need to get a cost baseline. So the output which comes from determined budget process is cost baseline. Now this is a very, very important output. Your complete earned value management system happens against cost baseline. Your future project performance, the cost control would be looking at this particular baseline. And this baseline will also become part of your project management plan, because project management plan has all the baselines. Now the cost baselines will have a components the way I explained the WBS structure while we were talking about aggregation. Similarly, we may have an activity level number and some contingency is applied here. So these kind of contingency and the contingency applied at WBS level all goes into cost baseline. So the aggregation of all these is budget. On the basis of reserve analysis, we get cost baseline. Now on top of it, management may put a management reserve. So the project budget is, say, project budget is cost baseline plus management reserve. A management has kept some amount of money as a reserve, as a contingency reserve to take care of unknown. These are the terms which are used frequently. So the contingency reserve which you have applied here and here are for known unknown. Like you know there will be a rework, but you don't know what would be the amount or quantum of that rework. So that was known unknown. But here, something you cannot even think of. You don't know, something happens geopolitically and things get changed. So something which you cannot visualize but can happen. For that, management puts some reserve while they make their business case against the project, and that is called management reserve. A project manager cannot use money from here until unless management allows you to do it. So cost baseline is the number, is a level which is a measurement or a target for project manager. But for an overall organization, they have kept a management reserve on top of it. Now the second output, we were doing funding limit reconciliation. So it generates cost funding requirements. So funding requirements. So project funding requirements is another output which comes from this knowledge, this process. As I was talking about here, it tells us that on a Q1 I need XXX dollar, on Q2, this beginning of Q2 I need a YYY dollar, and this is project funding requirement. So an output which tells us tells the management how frequently and how much money the project will need. Third output, this process may update some of the project documents like activity estimates, risk register, etc. So we may update some project document. So project documents get updated just based on the knowledge or discovery we do while applying these tool and technique. So in summary, a determined budget is a process which tells the management a cost baseline. A process of driving a budget for the project is determined budget.